When I was 8 years old, I lived with my parents and older siblings in a single-story house on a very small cul-de-sac by a lake. It was fall, and our neighborhood was mostly made up of seasonal homes, which meant only a few streets, including ours, had year-round residents. Because of that, it seemed as if everyone knew everyone else, and you could usually identify who was who just by the cars they drove. I remember my day going like any other. I had just gotten off the school bus, tossed my backpack in the yard, and started playing basketball. Our hoop was set up in the street, so anytime a car came by, we'd stop playing to let them pass. This day, my older siblings were off at their clubs, so the only person home besides me was my mom. Her car was in the driveway, and when she saw me, she smiled and went back to her laptop to work. After a little while, a car that I didn't recognize turned down our street. That was unusual for several reasons. First, people on our street didn't really like visitors. Second, it was midday, so every one of my neighbors was at work. And third, the plates on this car were from another state. Still, I figured it was just someone turning around to see the lake, which happened on occasion. Our house was the first on the street, so I expected to see this person circle back up after a minute. And sure enough, he did. But instead of driving past me and exiting the neighborhood, he stopped. I was standing across the street from my house near the basketball hoop when he rolled down his window. "Hey kid, let me see that ball." Without really thinking a second thought, I handed it over, and this guy tried to shoot it over his car and into the basket. Damn, I missed. "Hey man, go get it and let me try again." I remember thinking that this guy seemed cool. He was in a nice car, probably in his early 30s. He was calm in his demeanor, and despite the season, he dressed like it was summer, almost like he was headed off to a barbecue or something. I bent down to retrieve the ball, and that's when I heard a camera click. This guy had taken a picture of me. Now, even at 8, some alarm bells went off, although I dismissed them because of how friendly this guy seemed. When I got back to the car and went to hand the ball over, this man grabbed my wrist. The ball fell out of my hand, and he stared at me with his grip now tightening as he started to try to interlock his fingers with mine. That's when he said, "Just let it happen, kid. Enjoy this. And don't even think about screaming for help. Nobody's gonna hear you." I was confused by this because my mom was just inside our front door and she would have heard me if I screamed. She could have been outside in seconds. But what was happening was so strange to me that I didn't know how to react. I resisted his hand for what felt like minutes as he slowly began to press the gas. At this point, I had to jog alongside the car to keep from falling. And in that moment, this guy got what he wanted. He was holding my hand. It was obvious that he was thrilled by this. His eyes rolled back, he pressed his legs together, his tongue now spilling out of his mouth. It was disturbing beyond words. In my head, I thought, I can either scream and hope I live, or stay silent and probably die. So I chose the former. I screamed for my mom. The moment I began to yell out, he muttered, "Oh shit," before letting go and speeding off. Now, the roads where I lived were narrow, and when he turned off of our street onto the main road, he ran over a patch of lawn across the street, probably doing 40 miles an hour in a 15-mile-an-hour zone. My mom came running down our driveway just in time to see him tearing away, but she couldn't get his license plate number. She dragged me inside and I told her everything. Later, when my dad got home from work, I told him too. He was a volunteer EMT on weekends and he knew a lot of the local police. He reached out to some of them and they let us know that they hadn't received any other reports like mine, but they checked with surrounding towns anyway. Nothing. My mom admitted that she'd seen an unfamiliar car going up and down our road lately, but she hadn't thought much of it. We concluded that this man had probably been scouting the area. Our house clearly had children, while the other homes in the area were empty midday. He likely thought my mom's old, barely used car meant that no one was home. We thought that was the end of it. But then came that evening. Normally, my siblings would have been home, but it was Friday, and they asked to stay at a friend's house. My parents allowed it more easily than usual, probably thinking that fewer children at home meant less risk. This was before the always online era, so my siblings would have wanted to be outside late anyway. With the police and my parents now aware of what the man looked like, we tried to settle in for the night. Like I said earlier, our house is a single story, and I shared a room with my brothers at the opposite end of the hallway from my parents' room. Since my brothers were gone and I was spooked, my parents closed up my curtains and moved the living room TV into my room to distract me and keep some light on through the night. At around 1 a.m., I was still awake watching King of the Hill on Adult Swim. I was facing away from the window because the TV was across from it, when I heard a knocking coming from behind me. I froze. My first thought was maybe one of my siblings sneaking back in. They'd knock on the window sometimes to have me unlock the door for them. I didn't want to take any chances though, and after the day that I had, I didn't really feel like running interference to keep my brother from getting in trouble for coming home late with my parents. So instead of even turning around, I turned on every light I could on my way to my parents' room, including their bedroom light. This woke up my mom, but not my dad. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her about the knock. She was still adjusting to the light and I could see it on her face, so I turned it off again so she'd have an easier time. My parents' room had 3 large windows, one facing the front yard, one facing the side yard, and one facing the backyard. Thick woods lay behind the side and backyards, separating our house from the next house over. The backyard window also looked down on the basement door. From the top of the stairs heading to the basement, you could see into my parents' room. Now, during the spring and summer months, my parents would close their bedroom curtains. They wouldn't want seasonal visitors to be able to peer into their room from the lake. But in the fall and winter, my parents didn't take that precaution because they weren't exactly worried about anybody being out there. As I explained about the knock, my mom sat up in bed. And that's when she saw him. The man from earlier was now looking through the window. She screamed, which woke up my dad. And that's when the man outside shouted, "I just wanted to hold his hand." My dad grabbed the baseball bat that he kept in the room and stormed outside in nothing but his underwear. But the man had already bolted into the woods. Now, these woods weren't known for any big animals living in them, so unfortunately, he was safe. And he got away. We called the police again. After that night, my parents installed a basic home security system. Everyone on our street heard what happened. My parents also invested in more indoor activities for me and my brothers, which is how I got my first Xbox. Nothing like that ever happened again in our neighborhood, and I don't think any similar incidents were reported nearby. All I'm left to assume is that that man went back to whatever state his license plate was from, because we never saw him on our street ever again. This happened 5 years back, when I, a 20-year-old female, was 15. My great aunt's health at the time was failing, and she could no longer care for herself, so my family decided that she was better off at a nursing home. Due to her being an extreme hoarder, I don't want to shit on my family in any way, but this is important for the story. Her house sat abandoned. My father and I were the only ones that checked up on the house from time to time, and it started off small when we noticed minor stuff being moved around or drawers appearing as if they were looked through. Around that time, we didn't think much of it since another person close to my great aunt also had a key to the house, and we thought maybe he wanted to get some of his stuff since he used to live with her for some time. After a while, maybe a month later, things got stranger. We used to roam the house more to rescue some things in it, and just to get a look through everything. We did this for a couple of weeks straight, and in doing so, every day, I felt watched when we were there. In addition, we found more stuff moved around in place so we wouldn't notice immediately, like stuffed animals that used to sit on our shelf, now sitting above one another on the staircase, step by step. We also noticed dirty footprints, and more drawers ripped open and stuff inside spilling out everywhere. At this point, we grew suspicious of the situation and investigated more. We had late-night drives past the house just to check if we ever saw a flashlight or any sign of someone being inside. At that time, I started telling my friends about the situation. And as the stupid kids we were back then, we thought it would be a good adventure for us to just stay there for a night, play security, with the mission of finally catching this person that seemed almost like a ghost to us. Another bit of information that's important for this case is that there was no sign of anyone making their way into the house. There were no open windows and all doors were locked. Only we and this other guy were the ones that had keys. So fast forward to the night that we stayed there. Me and 3 of my friends just settled into the kitchen, not noticing anything out of the ordinary, beyond the quote-unquote normal stuff that had been going on. So we assumed that whoever this was wasn't around yet. We ordered pizza and just talked for a while waiting for something to happen. After a while, we decided that we'd go for a walk with my 2 dogs that I had with me. I made sure to definitely close and lock the door behind me when we left. When we returned after a 15-minute single lap around the corner, there was a single lamp on the far end of the living room that was turned on. This was absolutely odd because 1, we didn't do that, and 2, the living room was hoarding central. It was so filled with trash that whoever did turn it on had to climb over everything just to flip the switch. That's when we figured out that whoever this person was, they had to be in the house now. We decided to go into the kitchen and keep a low profile, just to see what would happen. After a while, one of my friends, let's call her Jane, chickened out and wanted to go home. Being that I'm not in the business of keeping someone anywhere that they don't want to be, we let her leave. And just 5 minutes after Jane closed the front door behind her, we heard someone walking down the wooden staircase, obviously thinking that the house was now empty. This was the moment we were waiting for, but honestly, we were so caught up listening to the creaking of the steps that we only realized what was actually happening when one of my dogs started barking, and the footsteps immediately ceased. There was now only one wall separating us from whoever just came walking down the stairs. And when we finally put 2 and 2 together, we all got so scared and just ran out of the house as fast as we could. There was a door separating the staircase from the hallway that we luckily locked as soon as we came back from the walk. So that person was now locked up there. When we finally all sat down outside the house and took a breath, we decided then that our best move would be to call the police and let them handle the situation. And after the shock of the situation wore off, we suddenly heard a male's voice speaking quietly, almost as if they were having a conversation on the phone. It was only then that we noticed that an upstairs window was slightly open. Whoever this was must have opened it at one point because, like I said when we touched down, none of the windows were ever open. We couldn't really make out anything that was being said, only something along the lines of, "Been caught." After 30 long minutes of sitting there, the police finally arrived and went inside. They looked through everything but found nothing. He for sure had enough time to simply hide somewhere. There was a room completely filled with cardboard boxes that reached almost to the ceiling. If this man channeled his inner child, he would have had a fort to hide in for days. Now at this point, things started to get extreme. It was like whoever this was playing games with us. After the cops found no one that night, he left notes everywhere in the house for us to find, with this weird drawn-on smiley face, along with illustrations of flowers with the words, "Catch me," placed underneath. He started putting things in front of doors so that anytime they'd open, a sort of alarm would go off, letting him know that someone was now in the house. He trashed rooms beyond recognition, destroyed furniture, even in the toilet without flushing, only placing a flower on top of his mess to be discovered later. He did all this without ever being caught face to face. Our checkups became more frequent, turning from once a day to every hour, but we never saw this man. We eventually decided to cut off all utilities. With no water or gas or electricity, we figured that the situation would calm down a little bit. Figuring that now that the house was hoarded beyond compare, and with no running water or electricity, that he would just abandon it. Wrong. After about 3 months of silence, one of my friends just happened to be driving past the house one night. He said that as he looked up at the second-story window, he saw a figure standing behind the curtain, as if they were staring outside. When he told me this, I was like, great, here we go again. And suddenly, the interest in this house was back. Well, one day we all decided to just turn up at the house. There were 7 of us total, and we were ready to search that damn thing from head to toe, compelled to find where this guy was hiding and how he was coming and going in the house. Still, everything was locked up tight. When we first got back inside, there was leftover and rotten food in the kitchen, and a surprise waiting for us in the living room. This guy had in a cardboard box. I was gonna say like some fucking dog, but what dog would do such a thing? That's when we decided to separate. 4 of us went inside the living area, while one of my friends stayed outside. And another friend, let's call him Carl, and I went into the stable area of the house because that part had a hole in the wall that connected the place the hay was kept to the attic. But we were never able to figure out where exactly that hole in the attic was. Carl was tossing little stones at the hole that seemed to be covered with something like cardboard from the other side, just so our friends would be able to hear the sound from inside to find the entrance. All of a sudden, it knocked back, and we actually saw the cardboard bending from someone hitting on it. That's when I yelled down to my friend outside, asking if they were finally able to find that damn entrance, when all I got back from her was, "No, everyone's downstairs." Just kind of shocked, Carl and I quickly made our way out of the stable and to the others in our party, saying if we go to the attic now, we've got him, since there would be no way for him to escape. He would have to pass us on the stairs, so we all ran upstairs. But again, nothing at all. After this, we just decided that we would give up, not go there again. We also realized that it might be dangerous. This man never seriously did anything to us except for creeping us out. But we were wondering what he would do if we seriously caught him and stood there in front of him. Our parents weren't all that happy with us for doing any of this behind their backs. So again, months passed without anything, only sometimes driving by and seeing a faint light inside, until the house was finally put up on the market to be sold. Today, it's been completely emptied out and is in the process of being renovated. Even in the cleanup process, while there was evidence of someone living there, no person was ever located. We don't know when they first got there, when they finally decided to leave, and what caused everything in between. As a 15-year-old, I wanted to confront this person, tell him to get the fuck out of my aunt's house. It wasn't his. But as a slightly more mature person now, I'm glad that it never came to that. I'm still blown away by the fact that we went searching for him. So did the cops, and no one could find him. This house isn't a mansion by any means. It's not so huge that it takes up a city block. But trying to locate this man amongst the mess was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. I'm happy that we never came face to face. Other than wanting to tell him to leave, I never really worked out how that interaction would play out. I find myself more happy than I thought I would, knowing that it never came to that. At the time of this story, I was in my 20s. I was young, ambitious, and at the time, a raging alcoholic and drug addict. My memory of that period is pretty hazy, so I apologize if some details are fuzzy. But I'm now almost a year sober, and I figured this is as good of a time as any to share this. I had moved from Arizona to Salt Lake City, Utah, and landed a job as a service tech. One of my assignments was installing new devices on a string of gas stations, starting down in St. George and working my way up the state to Salt Lake City, stopping at each store that needed upgrades. I can't remember exactly where I was on this particular night, somewhere between Richfield and another small town, but I'd finished the job late, at around 10, maybe 11 p.m., and decided to push on to the next town so I wouldn't have a 2-hour drive in the morning. As I drove down the highway, Google Maps told me to take a dirt road to reach the next town. I hesitated, but I made the turn anyway. It was a long, isolated trail of a road, lined with brush and trees like almost a natural wall. It wasn't really paved. You wouldn't take a truck on it unless you had to or it led somewhere specific. There was nothing around me but pitch black desert, along with my own high beams. Well, 5 to 7 minutes into this journey, my old 2008 work truck sputtered. It was a total beater. I cursed under my breath, put it in park, and checked under the hood. Nothing obvious was wrong. I glanced at my phone and, of course, no service. Checked my work phone. Same thing. My options were to sit there all night until daylight or try to find a spot with a signal. I chose the latter. Normally, I carry a firearm when traveling for work. That trip, though, I'd forgotten it. So instead, I armed myself with a 10-inch pipe wrench in one hand and my Milwaukee flashlight in the other before I started walking into the desert. I'm from Arizona, so I'm used to quiet, dark deserts. I'm not exactly someone who scares easily, but with each step away from the truck, I felt my tension grow. After about 10 minutes of walking, I heard muffled laughing coming from behind me. It sounded like something almost out of a kid's show. It was soft and weirdly playful. I spun around with a quickness, but even with my flashlight, I didn't see anything. My boots sank into the sand as I pushed forward, heart pounding like a ticking time bomb. That's when I heard it again, only closer this time, louder, like it was only 4 or 5 feet behind me. I felt my adrenaline surge, and without a second thought, I broke into a dead sprint through the brush and sand, scanning frantically for somewhere to hide. I don't believe in aliens or the paranormal. My first thought was a deranged person living out there in the desert, maybe a drug addict just like myself. Either way, I knew I was in trouble. I found a nearby rock, one about 3 feet tall, and did my best to crouch my body behind it, my knee digging painfully into the ground. The moon was bright enough that my eyes had adjusted to the darkness. I turned my flashlight off to avoid giving away my position. That's when I saw them, the silhouettes of 2 people running. I could just barely make them out, but they were there, moving quickly. I could hear them talking, though I was too far away to understand what it was they were saying. At that point, I honestly thought I was going to die. I even typed out a message to my family and friends telling them I loved them and apologizing for anything I'd done wrong in life. Of course, it didn't send. No service. But I was coping the only way I knew how. I'm not a small guy. I'm just under 6 feet and 230 pounds. But for all intents and purposes, I was pretty much unarmed. I knew I was outnumbered, and I had no idea how many others there might be out there. God only knew what they planned to do if they found me. I stayed crouching, waiting, but they didn't leave the area. They were scrambling around like mosquitoes, searching. That's when I heard a third set of footsteps. There had to be at least 3 people out there. I had one idea. I grabbed 2 small rocks, whispered a silent prayer despite not being religious at all, and threw them as far as I could in a direction away from the road and my truck. I heard the figures scurry toward the sound, shouting at each other as they moved through the desert. I used that moment of chaos to crouch walk back toward the truck through the brush. My boots filled with cold sand every step, branches stabbing at my work pants, and I could hear someone tailing me, but I refused to turn around. Then I saw my salvation, my work truck. Only the driver's door was wide open, and I knew that I'd closed it before I left. Heart now hammering, I make my way to the truck, checked the back seat quickly, flung the door open wider and climbed in. In a moment of panic, I did the one thing that probably shouldn't have worked, but it was my only option. I tried to start it. It took a couple of shots, but then it roared to life. I threw it into drive and floored it down the dirt road. As I sped off, my headlights illuminated hooded figures hiding along the roadside, all ducking as I passed, and then scattering off into the darkness like roaches in a freshly lit kitchen. I rolled down the window and hurled my pipe wrench as hard as I could at one of them before accelerating away. I don't think I hit him, but my best hopes were that that person left that evening concussed. Dust billowed up behind me. I yelled as I drove, white-knuckling the steering wheel, my mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of a small town ahead. I pulled off into a 7-Eleven parking lot around midnight, completely drenched in sweat. The cashier asked what was wrong, and I begged her to call the sheriff's office. When the sheriff arrived, he was an older, burly-looking man. He treated me more like a suspect than a victim. I'm heavily tattooed, and clearly he assumed the worst. Later, I found out a hose in the truck had burst. My boss, who was annoyed at my late-night call, told me to contact the sheriff and a mechanic. The mechanic was kind, didn't charge me for the repair, and said he'd never heard of anything like that happening in the area. The police, as you can imagine, weren't much help. They acted like I'd been awake too long, or I'd been hallucinating. They asked if I'd been drinking or using drugs, and barely wrote anything down in the report. I stayed that night at a motel, but I didn't get a single hour of sleep. I washed off the dirt, lay there wide awake, and thought more about what had happened. I ended up going home early and eventually quitting that job later for other reasons. Months later, a photo I'd taken during that service call resurfaced and reminded me of this night. I had to write it down. I wanted to tell someone. Were they trying to rob me? Did they see a work truck and think, expensive tools, copper? Were they planning to hurt me? I don't know. I just know that when I finally made it back to the truck, all the wire, pipe, and some of my power tools had been stolen. This is likely one of the scariest experiences I've ever had in my life, and it reminds me of something that I was told by an adult when I was much younger. We humans aren't really afraid of being alone in the dark. We're afraid of realizing someone else is there with us.